smooth. I'll never learn to live with that much abuse. 'Cause I guess I'm just a little too sensitive. Guess I'm just a little too sensitive. Guess I'm just a little too sensitive to you.
Okay, cool. I think we'll get started, and if anybody else joins, then fantastic, awesome. If not, we got a small intimate get together, so that's cool. What's up, Liv? I'm happy to see you here. And hi, my fellow leaders. This meeting is going to be recorded, so even if not a lot of people are actively here currently, they can review it on DSSTP's YouTube channel coming soon. And yeah, we're recording, so I still want to have this video just as like a record for people who want to review it in future terms. So right on, we'll get cooking. So for this event, I'm just going to do a brief introduction of who Drexel Students for Sensible Drug Policy is, and then we'll move into a brief presentation about Drexel's drug, alcohol, and amnesty-related policies, and then finish out with an open forum discussion to collect feedback from Drexel students and faculty about the policies that we go over and any changes that you'd like to see happen, just general impressions and feedback. And yeah, so I'm really excited, and thank you all for coming. My DSSP leaders, great to see you, and Olivia. Yeah. So real quick, Drexel Students for Sensible Drug Policy is a newly formed Drexel student organization. We were established earlier this term after a long and arduous process working with Drexel student organization, board, student conduct. We are finally finalized and active. We are an organization that centers harm reduction and policy reform, education, harm reduction, drug research and therapeutic applications in everything that we do. We aim to educate the student body about these topics, as well as do a lot of advocacy for the human rights of people that use drugs, for destigmatizing drug use and the importance of coming out as a person who uses drugs, as well as fighting the war on drugs throughout all of what we try to do. And to put a little disclaimer out there, as an organization and an affiliate of Drexel, we do not condemn or condone drug use. However, we are committed to reducing the harms associated with drug use and advocating for the rights of people who use drugs. So for this event, the preparation that we did was a comprehensive review of the most recent version of the Drexel Student Code of Conduct. And we also met with student conduct administrators to answer a lot of the questions that we had after reviewing these policies. And so we've done a lot of research and work in putting this together and having the most up-to-date information for you all. And our intentions behind this presentation is really to inform the Drexel student body about what policies affect them, as well as the sanctions that are in place in case you do violate the drug or alcohol policies. And we do want to place extra emphasis on incoming freshmen, especially in the fall and in subsequent years and terms in doing this presentation, because as new people coming to campus, we want to make sure everyone is informed and understands the situation of what they're coming into at Drexel. We also want to collect feedback directly from students and faculty that are at Drexel and use that feedback to inform policy change at Drexel. Student conduct has a process where they revise the student code of conduct every summer. They make major revisions. So we're really excited to take the outputs of this meeting and convert them into direct change that we'll hopefully see by fall of 2022. So thank you again for everyone who has come here today. So to get started, I'll just go over the policies and basic violations, and then we'll move into sanctions, and then a little bit about what student conduct is and does and where they're coming from, and then move into our discussion. So beginning with the alcohol policy at Drexel, key violations that you need to know about. This is not verbatim from the student code of conduct. I've kind of summarized it because there's a lot of unnecessary language, and we really just want to get to the main points of things. And so for if you are under 21 years of age, any consumption, possession, or purchasing of alcohol, as well as possessing empty alcohol containers, is a violation of the policy. That second one was really surprising to me. And I know a lot of people use empty alcohol containers or bottles to decorate their kitchens, or you see them a lot in frat houses, but that's actually a violation of the policy if you're under 21, and especially if you're in a Drexel residence hall or affiliated housing. That's important to be aware of. Outside of people that are just under 21 years of age, for all Drexel students, any disruptive conduct under the influence of alcohol is a violation of the policy, and we'll define what disruptive conduct is in a bit, as well as giving alcohol to underage persons or providing a space for the consumption of alcohol by underage persons. Possessing any objects that promote binge drinking, like beer funnels or kegs, anything that's designed to drink a lot of alcohol in a really short amount of time. Possessing those is a violation of the policy. And finally, drinking games are also a violation. And something also important about this point was that drinking games are a violation of the policy regardless of whether or not alcohol is being used or consumed. So if you're playing like beer pong, but instead of beer, you have water and like no one's drinking, like that's still a violation. And that actually happened to me my freshman year. I got caught up and had to go to student conduct for playing water pong. So I wish I had known and had this presentation when I was first at Drexel. And so drug policy violations, it's pretty similar, a lot of different just equivalents to alcohol, but the version of for different substances that are labeled as drugs. And so the drug policy at Drexel and a lot of other campuses around the country are based on the Drug Free Schools and Communities Act, which was an act established by the US Department of Education. And all colleges that really receive federal funding kind of operate under this act. And it's basically saying that all substances that are scheduled as illegal under federal government and federal law are not permitted on college campuses. And so any consumption, possession, purchasing, selling, distributing, or using any drugs is a violation of the policy. And this does include medical marijuana. We'll get into more specifics about specific policies about medical marijuana in a bit, but wanted to make sure that was put in there because, yeah, that was surprising to me. Any kind of suspicious odor or visual confirmation of drug use, and visual confirmation of drug use materials, like when they're combined. So like say like you're kind of reeking, maybe you like smoke some weed, or you are smoking weed and you smell like it, and then you also have like something that looks like a joint or drug paraphernalia, that could be considered a violation of the policy. Additionally, inhaling or ingesting substances that just alter your mental state generally and might not necessarily be classified as drugs officially, like glue or paint, that's a violation. Disruptive conduct under the influence of drugs, and again, we'll define that in a second, as well as providing a space for drug consumption or possessing or using drug paraphernalia is all violations of the code. I did want to mention though that just the act of being under the influence of drugs or substances isn't necessarily a violation of the policy. It's the act of actively using on campus or being really disruptive and getting in the way of other students' safety or well-being while under the influence. That's when you run into violations. And so, like, who knows, if you say you were to take a pot brownie and then go chill in Drexel Park and just enjoy yourself, like, you're not doing anything wrong as long as you're not disrupting other students. And so to define disruptive conduct, because it seems like a really subjective term, these are some of just a main summary of what they include in the Student Code of Conduct. So it's really like excessive noise, any lewd or indecent conduct, throwing, dropping, or projecting any substance that could cause damage, injury, or disruption. And what's included in this, which I thought was interesting to note, is it includes bodily fluids as disruptive conduct. And so say you've consumed a lot of alcohol or a substance, and say like you're throwing up, that is considered disruptive conduct. And if you are throwing up because of the influence of a substance, that would be technically a violation that counts as like disruptive conduct. So that's something to be aware of, but also something that like kind of made me angry because we're talking about the health of students, and it's not super aligned with promoting public health. But also just in general, just interfering with the ability of others to just use university facilities or services, just like be a person, interfering with the freedom of expression or movement of others. And also this disruptive conduct clause can apply to on and off campus gatherings. So even if you are, say, attending a party not on campus or not at a frat that's on campus, you can still get hit with a disruptive conduct violation. Say if you get like an excessive noise complaint from a neighbor, or Drexel police or public safety pulls up on you. So just to be aware of that. And also, before I continue, after this, we will be having like a brief discussion. So if anything comes up that surprises you or you feel a type of way about, or just like you didn't know before, like either make like a mental note or a physical note, because I would really love to hear from you all about what you're thinking about this. And this is a very safe space, a non-judgmental space. And so we would welcome any all and experiences or feedback that you have. But moving on, Drexel does have an amnesty policy. It's called the Responsible Dragon Amnesty Policy, or RDAP for short. And this amnesty policy was developed in 2017. And amnesty policies in general are designed to reduce the barriers to seeking medical assistance for students that might be under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And so basically the policy is like, say you're at a party and your friend consumes a lot of alcohol to the point where you're concerned for their health or well-being. Before amnesty policies existed, a lot of students maybe wouldn't call 911 or public safety or the police or not like anything like that, out of fear that if they did, then them and their friend and the host of the party would be punished for, violating the drug or alcohol policies. But so the amnesty policy is basically designed to protect a student that is having a medical emergency due to ingesting a substance, as well as the student calling to make sure that that student receives the care that they need. And so it seeks to be rehabilitative and not punitive. And so if you are in a situation where you need to use this amnesty policy, in the aftermath, you will not be found responsible for violating the drug or alcohol policies, because the policy will apply. And lost my train of thought. Yes, but the amnesty policy. And so you will afterwards have to go through, like, you'll have to meet with student conduct, regardless of if it's a drug or alcohol violation or an amnesty policy application. But so you'll meet with student conduct, and the meeting with them is not designed to like punish you or get you in trouble. It's really just to understand the situation a little bit better, and just find out what happened and connect you to any resources if you need. Like, say a student, when they come in and meet with student conduct and say that they have been feeling really depressed lately and they just wanted to go and get really messed up and really, really drunk and go to a party and do that. Like, instead of, again, punishing them, it'll be like, okay, well, let's talk about like why you've been feeling so depressed and why maybe you're using substances in a way that isn't as safe. And how can we help you with that? Like, how can we either connect you to a drug education program that will help you like examine your substance use, or how can we connect you to Drexel counseling or counseling services outside of Drexel University to make sure that you're getting the mental health support that you need in order to be a safe and healthy individual. So that's really awesome, and really respect this amnesty policy. One thing to note, though, that I was very surprised to come across is that the amnesty policy does not apply if you are found basically by a non-Drexel student. So if like I'm a Drexel student and my friend's in a bad way and I call, amnesty policy will apply to both of us and we'll be straight. But if, say, like you're throwing up on Drexel Park, or you've like passed out at Drexel Park and you're by yourself, and a public safety officer comes across you and discovers that you're like very intoxicated and like not in a good way, they'll still, of course, connect you to medical services as needed, but that would be found to be a violation of the drug or alcohol policies. And so if a student is not the one calling or facilitating that, or if you, the person having a medical emergency, isn't making that call, the amnesty policy will not apply to you. And I have a pretty big problem with that, and that's something that that we would like to be changing going forward, but something really interesting to note, because yeah, it wasn't really public knowledge to my understanding. And so, yeah, what the code kind of doesn't tell you, something that's cool is that the amnesty policy is not limited to Drexel's campus. So even if you're experiencing, or your friend is experiencing, a medical emergency at an off-campus party, or even when you're studying abroad, like in a different country or different part of the country, you can still, if you do have to seek medical attention for something like this, the amnesty policy will still apply to you, which is awesome. There are no frequency restrictions with the amnesty policy. So if the policy applies to you once, that doesn't mean you cannot utilize it in the future, which is another really big plus to this policy. If you do have repeated encounters, it's not like you won't be able to access the policy, but student conduct will likely meet with you, as they will after every time the policy is applied, and maybe have a more in-depth conversation about why you're consistently getting in these unsafe situations, and kind of working with you to connect you to resources. And if you're kind of choosing to not work with student conduct and utilize the resources, like if they recommend you seek counseling and you don't seek counseling, or if they recommend you do an education module and you don't, that's when we might start getting into more like punitive measures and sanctions. And so that's something to be aware of. Yeah, and so I already mentioned briefly like the follow-up afterwards. You have that meeting with them, and then usually education modules and potential referrals to counseling as needed. And so I really love that that is kind of their first approach, instead of immediately punishing students. As well as the fact, something to be aware of, if you go to the hospital because of a medical emergency from substances, like student conduct won't notify your parents or anybody really. Any violation of the student conduct, no one gets contacted. But it's a wider Drexel policy that if a student goes to the hospital, they will notify your emergency contact. And so that's something to be aware of. Like if you are in the position where you do get transported and your parent is your emergency contact, they will likely find out about that. So something to be aware of. And then if like a situation is suspicious, like they suspect there's like really conflicting, like wildly conflicting stories from multiple people that were at the situation, or there's a potential that a student might have been assaulted or drugged against their will, student conduct might do a more intense investigation of those circumstances. So now moving into sanctions, super important to be aware of. So these are some of the drug policy violation sanctions. They have different ones for first, second, and third violations, but I want to preface all of the sanctions are relatively subjective. And so depending on the severity of the violation, student conduct it's kind of at their discretion to give less severe sanctions or more severe sanctions as necessary. And so with drugs specifically, if there are large quantities of drugs involved, or a lot of social sharing, or potentially like dealing drugs, those might lead to more severe sanctions than are listed here, or like per each. And so that's something to be aware of. You can see like for first violations, something I want to bring your attention to is that like for your first drug policy violation, it is possible that you could be expelled depending on how severe it is. And so that's a pretty serious violation. And so I really want to underscore that. But otherwise, it's really in the range of like disciplinary probation, having everyone after their first violation has to do like a drug education module and pay $100 fine. And you can also potentially lose or be threatened to lose any university affiliated housing with any drug violation for second or third. And you can see on the screen, it kind of just scales up as you continue to violate. These are their general guidelines, not like set in stone. Again, it's like at their discretion and it's case by case, but definitely like gets pretty severe. So want to make sure everyone's aware of that. Alcohol policy violations are relatively similar, but actually like pretty unequal compared to the drug policy violations. As you can see on basically all of the violations, first, second, and third for alcohol, expulsion isn't mentioned once. And I think it's very interesting that for drug policy violations, on your first violation, expulsion is a potential punishment. And so that's a huge inequity, as well as the fact is for your first violation, usually it's like a 3-term disciplinary probation minimum. And for alcohol, it's only a 2-term disciplinary probation. And so even though this is a pretty minor difference, it's still, to me and to Drexel Students for Sensible Drug Policy in the stances that we have, like that's pretty weird and doesn't make a lot of sense. As well as the fact that you can lose, be threatened to lose or immediately lose your university affiliated housing with a drug violation versus with alcohol that isn't brought onto the table until the second violation. And again, these are all flexible and to the discretion of student conduct, but those disparities were pretty interesting and definitely something that we would like to work on remediating as we're working for policy changes in this regard. So moving into kind of like a little special topic, medical marijuana at Drexel the use of medical marijuana on campus is technically a violation of the drug policy. And I thought this was very interesting because this quote at the top is directly like word for word pulled from what they define as a violation of the drug policy, which is the possession and or use of narcotics or drugs other than those medically prescribed, properly used, properly secured in the original container. That would be a violation. And so when I read that, I was thinking about like, okay, so say I have a medical card that I've been prescribed by a doctor and I've obtained fully legally in Pennsylvania because medical cannabis is legal in Pennsylvania. I go to the dispensary, which mind you is like 2 blocks from Drexel's campus, sus. And I purchase, say, a pre-rolled joint from this dispensary that is medically prescribed. I properly use it by smoking it under the direction of my physician. If it's properly secured in, say, its original container or whatever I purchased it in, and I secure it properly, again, whatever that means, then technically I wouldn't be violating the drug policy. However, throughout the drug policy, they do mention that medical marijuana is not included or is included as a violation of the drug policy. And so I definitely have issues with that wording because like I just laid out, I basically could use medical marijuana and it wouldn't be an issue based on the language they include. And so because marijuana isn't legal federally, Drexel isn't able to, I guess, make those exceptions. Drexel receives a lot of federal funding, and because they do that, regardless of what Pennsylvania or Philadelphia thinks about marijuana, they kind of have to adhere to federal guidelines, which is really frustrating. But to know if you are a student with a med card, Student Conduct recommends that students work with disability resources to find accommodations as needed for med card use or medical marijuana use. They can sometimes work with you to get you out of the 2-year housing agreement where like you have to live with Drexel affiliated housing for your first 2 years at Drexel. They can help get you out of that so you're able to use medical marijuana off campus since you aren't allowed to use it on campus. And you have to have a Pennsylvania card in order to be eligible for those resources. And again, overall, you can't possess or use marijuana on campus. And so those were just some interesting things that I found and was pretty surprised at, as well as the fact as you are not permitted to have any marijuana related co-ops, medical, recreational, or like anything in between. again, because Drexel receives that federal funding and marijuana is still a federally illegal substance. Even in states where marijuana is like fully legal recreationally and medically, you still aren't able to partake in co-ops for credit, which is pretty messed up. And so overall, things that surprised us in doing the research for this presentation was, first off, that public safety isn't actively looking to bust people for drug use. I was under the impression that it was going to be pretty sus and like, I don't know, like it was going to, because of the policies read as very like hard on drugs, like not very forgiving or lenient. Like I thought it was going to be a lot more aggressive, but student conduct expressed that public safety isn't like actively looking for those things. It's really people who are being incredibly obvious about substance use on campus, or are being really disruptive. So that was good to know. I was really surprised that projecting substance from the body, like throwing up under the intoxication of alcohol, was considered a violation of the policy, especially considering that like if I just had like a stomach bug and threw up in Drexel Park, I'd be chilling. But if I was under the influence of alcohol, that'd be a different scenario. So that was interesting. The more severe sanctions for drugs than alcohol was surprising. Well, not really surprising, unfortunately not surprising, but still overall really frustrating because even though alcohol is technically a legal substance in the United States federally and drugs are not, like alcohol is a lot more unsafe than certain substances. And so even though like Drexel does have to adhere to federal guidelines, it just again is underscoring how much it doesn't make sense and how alcohol is a drug, it is a substance, and the fact that we like separate those in our policies in our minds is just doesn't make a lot of sense. Additionally, the medical marijuana regulations were pretty surprising considering it is legal in Pennsylvania medically. And then the fact that Drexel's federal funding sources influence like our policies on campus surprised me. And so finally, to wrap up, I just wanted to express some things that I was thinking about after our meeting with student conduct. They have a primary team that we met with to answer these questions. They also have like a higher up board that handles more severe sanction cases, as well as any like appeals, or if a student is denying the events that happened, it'll go up to the higher board. To be fully transparent, they expressed that all student conduct behavior is stored in a secure online database, and they don't do this to like track individual students, but rather to, if like a student is presenting with a violation of the code of conduct, they'll go and see if they've had violations in the past, just to better understand the situation. They edit the code of conduct twice a year. They do major revisions in the summer term and minor revisions in winter term. So we're actually really well poised to take the feedback from this meeting and actually create some actionable change in summer term, which is awesome. And finally, like student conduct generally is very compassionate towards students. And my experiences with them my freshman year were not reflective of this. I felt like it was very much like meant to intimidate students and kind of like pin them into a corner of admitting their wrongdoings. But the individuals that I met with were incredibly sweet and very much about harm reduction, which I was really surprised at, like pleasantly surprised at. So that's awesome. And these were just some of the observations I had. Like, again, I thought when I was going into our meetings with like student conduct and even in researching for this presentation, I thought it was going to be very much rooted in those 80s thoughts and mentalities of like war on drugs and drugs are bad and hard on drugs. And a lot of institutions will ignore the reality that drug use is a natural part of human society. And I thought that was going to be reflected at Drexel, but the student conduct officers recognize that it's a part of the culture in college campuses in America and at Drexel, and are really aiming just to keep students safe and healthy, and again, like prioritize their mental health and really examine the full situation of maybe what led to a violation of these policies. So that was awesome. They're definitely not abstinence only in their approach. They do center harm reduction, which is lovely. I would love to see more harm reduction focused language in the code of conduct, because again, reading the actual word for word code of conduct, it seems a lot more like punitive and not understanding compared to the actual individuals behind those policies. And yeah, very much rehabilitative over punishing. And they seemed very, very receptive to feedback from the student body and learning about working with us and other organizations to update and modify the policies, and just we're very open-minded in that sense. So I really do have to applaud student conduct for that. And these are some of our upcoming things that we'd like to learn about and present about to the student body, specifically like resident advisor involvement in and resident rights for people with who live in Drexel affiliated housing, as well as examining which federal policies we need to start advocating for as an organization and a student body in order to see changes that reflect like harm reduction fully in Drexel's policies. Because again, because of the funding, we need to see federal change in order to make local change. And as well as looking at the like specific training and interactions of public safety and Drexel Police Department with people who use substances, as well as if they are trained in mental health first aid. I'd also am really interested in learning more about Drexel's counseling resources and their approach to alcohol and drug counseling, as well as student health services and the specific initiatives they have to support students either in active addiction or that are struggling with substance use in any way. And then finally, just official Drexel University stances on drug use and policy, both internally at Drexel as well as externally in the greater Philadelphia region, the state of Pennsylvania, and the country. Thank you very much for listening. I threw a lot of information at y'all, but now I'd like to shift gears into talking about some of the policies that I laid out, and I welcome like any questions. I got a couple questions for you all. But I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can look at all of y'all's beautiful faces.